we won't survive. And so we're going to get started here with our theme as we continue on the day of honoring God by living generously. Well, I want to open with a phrase that might alarm some of you. Drive it like you stole it. That's not what I did, and not the advice that I followed that helped me keep my high school job. It's my first job. See, I worked at a waterbed store in the suburbs of Chicago. Somehow was able to start in that career and work part-time at this shop. And so I was kind of a stock man, kind of loaded trucks and all that type of stuff. My boss named Glenn, and Glenn, he was pretty much the boss, and he was kind of the main guy that worked. So when I went in, I worked for Glenn. And so Glenn would give me these different tasks to do in the warehouse and things like that. I would run errands to grab him Arby's or Subway across the way, because I was his first kind of person that was available all day. So I would his errand, I would go to the store and get some things for him. And then and these things were all close by, right? So I would bike up there and I'd be this stock worker and stuff like that. And so I'd help them. And then even Glenn was a big fan of Star Trek. This is not Star Trek. And so I didn't really care for Star Trek, but he said, well, have you seen this one? Of course, the answer was always no. And he says, oh, you got to sit down and see it. So I said, oh, like right now? Yeah, you need to watch this one. So I would watch Star Trek with Glenn, being paid $5 an hour to watch Star Trek. It was amazing. So that was my job. But I did a lot of other things. And so there was times that we needed to go to the central office several suburbs away to pick up something. So he entrusted me with his 1992 era Thunderbird, okay? And this was a pretty nice vehicle, 6-cylinder, that baby could cook, right? And so I would drive that thing. Okay, I'm 17 years old, no GPS, no phone. They didn't have phones back in those dark ages. And I just knew kind of where I was going to go to this warehouse. So I went and picked up at the warehouse. So I drove this, it was teal. I remember this teal Thunderbird. And so I drove that thing. That wasn't mine, right? It was his. And so he gave me this assignment, say, hey, go pick up this thing, go pick up this thing, pick up this. So I did. I was driving on 294 interstate, like crazy, right? Tolls and all that stuff. I was just flying and having a great time. So I accomplished that task and was able to come home. And I was really thrilled to drive this vehicle, because the car that I was driving was a 1987 Toyota Tercel. And that baby looked sharp right in that picture. That was like AI generated, because mine didn't, but that wasn't actually mine either, because that was my dad's car. But somehow in that process, that trust, I don't know if this was a test, if I could drive his Thunderbird, because eventually he trusted me to load up that hatchback with for a delivery for somebody. A little futon thing, that's what we sold there, and waterbeds and things. And so he would send me in my car, and that was fantastic, because you know what? That opened up a whole nother revenue stream for me. Because other than $5 an hour, you got paid $35 to do a delivery and install. And I thought, whoa, I could do that right after work. I'll make just as much money than sitting here. And so that's what he entrusted me to do that too. But like I said, that wasn't my car either. It was my dad's car. But I was able to use it. Actually, my mode of transportation was a 10-speed. And this 10-speed, it literally looked like that. Somehow I found that like online. That was a 10-speed. That was and that's what I rode my bike to the place and then would do all those things. But you know what? That bike wasn't mine either. It was my brother's. So none of this was mine. But these are all the transportation. But I was entrusted with all those things, and my brother didn't necessarily entrust me because he was long gone by then, 10 years older than I am. So I just rode his bike. And so that whole story is a great lead-in to what we're talking about, of living generously. And there was several times when, and I know you can relate to times when your boss came back, and you're like, oh man, the boss is coming. I better make sure this was done. They expect me to do this thing, and I'm going to do this. And that's the whole point of the part in Matthew that we're talking about today, Matthew 24 through 25. And we're not going to read the entire two-chapter passage, but this represents the final teaching before Jesus went to the cross. In these verses, we find things like about his second coming, about using the Noah's example, that there's a thief in the night. If you follow kind of some of the things that are happening there, that Jesus would come in an unexpected way. We have the 10 bridesmaids and the 10 lamps, and all. We've talked about that actually in our Sundays recently. That there was a reference to a master going on a journey. So he's referencing the last teaching. He wanted this very important things that he wanted the people to know, and this is what his focus was to be prepared, to be responsible, to be ready and productive and accountable. All these things show up in these passages. And Jesus is speaking about the future and even about final judgment. And in this passage, we have sandwiched between these concepts the parable of the talents. Or I think in our thing says parable of talents or the bags of silver, depends on how you see that. And so we are looking at this parable. Now, a parable was, as we know in Jesus's examples, that was just a regular, everyday example that made a spiritual point. So that's kind of the parable that we see again. Very realistic aspects of social life, of how things work. But the big context of this whole passage was the master's soon return. And I would say that in the events of our world, we have a deeper sense of his soon second coming, his return. The boss, the big B, the big boss is coming back, right? And so we need to be prepared and be good stewards. And it was very common in this day for the boss to go away, right? And they went away on this long trip. Well, they weren't on cars and trains, obviously. Travel took long and journeys were long, and they maybe had to go on boats, and they were doing these things. So it was very common for the boss to go away, and the servants that were there would become kind of in charge of stewarding the property. They were entrusted with responsibility. And so the focus today is living generously. To frame our understanding of this parable, it's helpful to look back a chapter just before this to discover the heart, the generous heart of the master. So it'll be on the screen there. This is Matthew 24. Before we get to this passage, it talks about this. It says this. Make sure I have that right. Okay, yeah. Faithful, sensible servant is one to whom the master can give the responsibility of managing his other household servants and feeding them. If the master returns and finds that the servant has done a good job, there will be a reward. I tell you the truth, the master will put their servant in charge of all he owns. Then it continues, it says, but what if the servant is evil and thinks my master won't be back for a while, and he begins beating the other servants, partying and getting drunk? The master will return unannounced and unexpected. So this kind of, Jesus references this in his teaching, that there was this unexpected return. We didn't know exactly when the boss was going to come back. And it's kind of like, it sets up what we're talking about. And this idea of a servant, which would be the original word like doulos, was an important character, right? They were a servant, but then when the master would go away, their responsibility would be leveled up to be more of a steward. So maybe they didn't use terms like that, but the idea was, okay, you went from just serving the master to, well, the master's gone, to being in charge of more stuff. And so that's exactly what's happened in this passage. We enter the story when we identify, too, that we are also expected to be faithful servants. And from this parable, which can be considered one of his most serious teachings, we understand that we are to steward what he's entrusted us. And time is running out because the master will soon return. And we can live generously when we respond to three expectations of the master. And these can be found in the three different parts of the passage that we'll read in Matthew 25. The first part is this: the master goes away. The master goes away. And this speaks of the expectation of assignment. And as he's going away, he is giving them an assignment. It says in our passage, again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left on his trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. So here we have this example of the story. We're going to continue on, but I wanted to pause for a minute. Again, you have the servant that was entrusted with a little bit more responsibility. You had 5, 2, and 1. That's kind of the layout of how things worked. And understand, number one is that there was generous amounts. Generous amounts. We don't know the exact figure. Some scholars believe that what was dispersed that day may have totaled $2 million in our day. $2 million between all of that 5, 2, 1. That was spread out. It had to do with kind of the daily wage and all that stuff, and I didn't want to bore you with all those details, but that's an enormous amount of money, right? If he entrusted that amount much money with us, it would be pretty important. So there's a generous amount. These bags of silver, or some say talents, may have totaled that much. And there's evident criteria. So the criteria that he said was according to their ability. So maybe one was older than another, maybe another had an experience, maybe just their proven track of faithfulness said, okay, I'm going to give this guy 5, but I'm going to give this guy 2, okay? And we'll try it with this one guy was given 1. And so we don't know the exact thing, but there was criteria that maybe they were showed faithfulness already. We don't really know. But there was not the same amount, and there was not the same ability, but there was the same expectation, and that was to be productive stewards. And what do you think it was like for the one-bag servant? Right, why did I get 1? He got 5. That's not fair, right? Or we don't know. We don't know exactly what he was thinking, but he's kind of. We'll find out later. He kind of was not really confident in this whole arrangement. He didn't really like this deal, and so he probably thought, well, doesn't he trust me? I could do more than 1, But anyway, this is what happened. But in 2 Corinthians, it says this. Remember this, a farmer who plants only a few seeds will get a small crop, but the one who plants generously will get a generous crop. So we see these different parts while the master is away, what's happening. There's the criteria, but there's also, lastly, an active choice that was required, an active choice. With each bag that was given, they had a choice, either build or bury. And that's what their choices they were left with, build or bury. And so we're not sure how long the master was gone, but that's not the point. The point was that the boss was coming back, and we know that to be true. The master would return soon, and we have a choice to make, and he has given us an expectation of an assignment, of something to do with what he's entrusted us. We are his servants, and the things that he's given, his talents, skills, and abilities that he's entrusted with us need to be used for the kingdom, to expand his kingdom. And time is running out, and so we see in this parable a second expectation. So the first one is assignment. The second one we see, part of the story, is the master returns. Expected. This is what's going to happen, right? They knew it was going to happen. And the expectation here is accountability. Accountability. It says in verse 19, after a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account. Enter dun dun dun, right? Either celebration or danger. And so here's what we have. Give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. So now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. The servant who had received 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest. I have earned 2 more. The master said again, well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. So now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. And so the master returned. And he came with the expectation that they are going to be held accountable for what they did while he was gone. And he says, even though it was a long time, he returns and he's full of praise. That's a job review or a progress thing, and you're like, hey, you're doing great. We like to hear that. And there was much celebration. Let's celebrate together. So a few things I want to point out. One, it was a long time. The time was long, but his return is certain. The boss came back. And that it was an excited or a nervous feeling, depending on how you process that time while the master was away. And with the obvious connection there, again, as we were talking about this passage, positioned in a way is such that is right before Jesus heads to the cross. He's wanting the disciples and he's wanting us to know that the time is running short. That a long time has passed, but there is time for his return. And we must give an account. And the assignment was over. When he came back, the one that buried it, he couldn't, let me just try to, no, it was too late. It was too late. They had the time, and he had come, and they had to give an account, and the master expected to see progress. So the master is full of praise. Well done. And that's such a great phrase to hear in this passage. And I think that should be our target for the end of our days, that it could be said of us, well done. But I also think it could be a target for us at the end of every day, to have that well done, that divine pat on the back. Well done, you're doing the right thing. And so the master was full of praise for this. And then we see more responsibility was given. And we see the response is like a ditto, like a double repeat, exactly what happened based on their ability. And we see this underlined here, is that because it wasn't the same amount for the assignment, but the approach to their assignment was that of faithfulness. It was of a heart posture that says, I'm going to steward this generous gift that this master has given me, and I'm going to steward that well. Now, I don't know if driving this Thunderbird was like a test. Like, I don't know. He wasn't really that way. He just like, this needs to be done. Go take my car. It's fine, because I didn't have a car to do it. So he entrusted me to deliver on some of my own things. He gave me more responsibility. So therefore, I was representing the store, which a little hatchback Toyota. I guess that's fine. I don't know. But I could earn 7 times the potential of working for an hour. I could go, and I thought, man, this is amazing, And so I was given this other responsibility that he was given. There was a few times that I had to kind of watch the store for a minute while he ran to do something, And so, I was 17, 18, 19 years old. It was an amazing job. And so that whole experience, and I can tell you more about that later if you want, but that whole experience allowed me to work in other furniture settings. That was like my big calling, but that was a pathway. It gave me experience, and it gave me some other opportunities to provide for my family since then. But more responsibilities were given. There was celebration. In our Bible engagement, it says this, a phrase, I wanted to pull this out. Everyone loves to know that their decisions were the right ones and receive praise for a job well done. These 2 servants had done their jobs with excellence and care. The way they chose to invest the resources had helped their master's mission, which led to blessing and abundance for themselves too. And everyone watching must have been pleased and proud. Everyone except the one that had chosen to bury what he'd been given. The third thing that we see is the master responds. The master responds. And this is the expectation of action. The expectation of action. So we see these three things laying out here. So we see in verse 24 of chapter 25 of Matthew, then the servant with 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. Let's go. So the master has something to say. And listen to what he says. In verse 26, we see this, but what had happened here is that this servant had misjudged the master's heart. He accused the master of being kind of this shrewd guy and not knowing. He was afraid that he would lose it. Maybe he didn't trust the guy. Maybe he didn't know if he was actually going to get anything back. We don't really know, but he misjudges the master's generous heart. And it was such an enormous amount, but maybe he was kind of accusing him of what's the catch, right? What's the catch here? I don't try. You've been in the this sounds a little too good, so I'm just going to hold on for a bit. It says in verse 26, but the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. So this servant is labeled as wicked and lazy. And so we don't know exactly what was going on here, but we know some things as I kind of studied this about maybe what was going on, and we're going to discover that just for a little bit here. But he's pretty serious, a wicked and lazy servant, and the question and answer shape of the master's response it says that it doesn't necessarily agree. So it's kind of like his response is like, if you knew I was like that. He's not necessarily agreeing that he was like that, but I was almost actually saying, even if I was that way, which would a generous guy that just gave out $2 million really be that? I don't know. He was a very generous giving master. And so he entrusted with this large amount. And so he's kind of accusing him. And he said, even if that was true, you could at least take it to the bank, which was a common practice. You could earn interest that way. And there's a whole kind of an economy part of how they earned interest, because they couldn't charge interest for their fellow Jews, but to the Gentiles they could, and boy did they. And so there's ways that you can that you could earn money there. So he's kind of addressing that he has something to say, and his response is pretty stern. And he follows the slave's logic without conceding to the premise. That's what one commentary said. So this was very common. And then he says in verse 28, he says, then he ordered, take the money from this servant and give it to the one who with the 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Ooh, pretty serious, right? Master had a response. He expected action. And the servant's behavior and mistrust, he thought, really deserved punishment. And it seems kind of harsh, but Jesus was making a point, because I think here that this servant had an attitude problem. I think he had an attitude problem. Why did I only get one? What are they doing? Right? We see this a little bit. He's labeled as being lazy. He settled for minimal involvement. You don't have to do anything. You just put it in a hold. It's over. You don't have to do anything else. Minimal involvement is what he settled for. He squandered this generous resource. He also had a fear problem. It says he was afraid. I was afraid. Mistrust, his fear. Fear can be a paralyzing element. I don't know. I'm just frozen. I don't know what to do. And so this is what this servant was. And sometimes I would say fear paralyzes, but I think also perfection paralyzes. Because maybe it's like, man, I just need the best plan, the most perfect plan on how to develop this. And I don't know what to do. Well, that's not going to work, and that's not going to work, and I'm not. So he just didn't do anything. So that can be the case too. Perfection can paralyze just as much as fear can. Some scholars believe that maybe this servant was going to keep it himself. Think about it. If he takes it to the bank, there's names on that account. There's got account numbers. Maybe he was just going to hide and keep it for himself. Maybe the master won't know. I don't know. I don't know how he would think that, but it could be. The problem with the wicked servant, it was about the attitude about the master. He considered the master mean or unconcerned. And some people have that same idea of God, right? That he's mean, unconcerned. I don't know how if I can trust him. He's given me resources, but I'm kind of keeping for myself because I want to be in control of some things. And all those things kind of happen. It can happen in our lives. But this servant, he lacked action for the master and lacked faith in the master. So the master had a plan. He probably had this whole plan in the beginning. Hey, I'm going to give these guys, and if they prove well, I'm going to give them more responsibility. I'm going to give them more money. And what are they going to do with that? They're going to give even more. And so the more and more and more was given, and all the while, the master is growing his influence and can make a bigger impact in the community. And all those things can happen. So the master was serious about his expectation of stewardship. 2 slides I wanted to share with some of the Bible engagement wordage says, those who truly know God should realize that his business is to help all people know of his great love. They would also understood that Jesus was telling them, like an overseer, God has a perfect right to expect all of us to be about his business until Jesus returns. God has given each of us different things to invest on his behalf and and available time. And he wants us to use them wisely. A life that honors God is one spent helping others to know him. It involves sharing the good news with others, meeting people's needs, and helping them reach their full potential for God. That's what this ends up being more about. And this parable points to us to key concepts that the disciples needed to apply because the master was going to be going away. And so the master, Jesus wanted them to know, this is what I expect. I'm going to be going. I will return at the second coming. And disciples in the meantime need to be busy doing the work of the master. He's headed to the cross. He wants them to know these things. It's not about a timetable. He focuses on the attitudes and the character qualities that guide their discipleship. From that time on, he will no longer be with them physically. So he wanted them to know these things. So as we begin to kind of apply some of these things to our lives as modern day disciples, we know that balanced discipleship entails both immediate and long-term readiness. So we need to have the long-term ready, but we need to be ready every day. The disciples were to plan for an extended absence and make profitable use of the giftedness in the meantime. And this parable emphasizes the wise use of one's God-given abilities is a responsibility that accompanies a right relationship with God. A person's faithfulness is evidence as to whether he or truly is one of Jesus' own disciples. It's a distinctive part of being a disciple that we are generous and wise and using the resources that he's given us. The first two servants here are really true disciples. It's indicating that this is a trademark. The third just buried it. They didn't do anything with it. Were they truly a disciple? That's the question. The wicked servant hoarded what he had given and risked nothing. He said, no risk for me. I'm just going to bury this thing. Risk nothing and live safe, and you'll lose the very things you imagine you were protecting. So sometimes he chose safety instead of risk. So as we begin to see two choices emerge, we either to invest wisely for God's kingdom or waste foolishly for our own. That's where we're left with. And what are some practical ways for you that maybe God expecting you to invest what he's given for his kingdom? God in his generosity has given us many talents, skills, abilities, influence. He's given these things, and we need to steward those things well. And the master is expecting that. So where's your allegiance? If you need to look at proof, maybe take an honest look at your calendar. And this is not an accusatory word, right? It's just, this is serious, right? We need to look at our calendars. What are we prioritizing? Look at your bank app. Look at your checking account. What's the priority there? What can you see? Are you using your resources, not just money, but your talents and all that to maximize God's kingdom? He wants us to be growing and be actively living in his way. Living a whole life of generosity, not to mention just the finances, even the areas of tithing, tithing is important. I think a key thing that I discovered through a men's teaching that I had. When you think about tithing, you tithe up. You serve the king. I'm tithing up. Now a tip you serve is for somebody, a tip at a restaurant, they serve you, so you give them a tip. God's not after a tip, he's after a tithe. He wants our direction to be on him. And that's just one area, right? All of our abilities, hobbies, and interests can be used to be stewarded to use in his kingdom. It says in Proverbs, the generous will prosper, and those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. That's not why we do it. We do it to serve the king. All of this whole month is not about the external, about the internal. We talked about that last week. It's about what's going on in our heart. And this servant had some bad things going on in his heart of mistrust. But we can respond to him. And God is generous, and he expects us to be stewards, as we know. And as we've been discovering this month, it's all, like I said, all about the heart. And we reflect God's generous heart when we not only understand, but we follow through with these expectations. There's an undercurrent of this whole section of Scripture that we need to be aligning with God's mission. And part of his big mission is that all men be saved. All men and women, all of us, that there will be salvation for all. And we have this expectation that we will try to bring as many as we can with us, not because God wants this gigantic kingdom, which he does, but because there's individuals that are at stake. And so we need to be active in the mission that God has for us, a church and us individually. And we need to commit to the master's assignment that he's given us. So as we begin to apply things, I want to ask us a couple of things. One is this, is what's in your 5 bags? Think about that. A practical step. What's in your 5 bags? What's in your bag? And to ask the second question, let me follow along, make sure I'm good. Yep. Is how can they be stewarded to better expand his kingdom? So I want you to think about that. Take a top 5 stewardship inventory, whatever that may be. Do that this week. What's in your bag? The top 5 stewardship inventory, and then how can they be stewarded for his kingdom and to level up his impact? I think do I have one more click on there? I didn't write that down. Yes. Isaiah 32:8 says this, but generous people plan to do what is generous, and they stand firm in their generosity. Let's use the skills and talents he's given us to maximize his kingdom. You know, as we begin to respond to this word, that's a great application point. There's also a point of salvation too as well. Any passage about Jesus and his return is really talking about where are you at in your salvation? Have you committed your life to him? The biggest gift God leaves for us is salvation. And we have the assignment to decide if we're going to accept that gift. And what we do with that gift tells us everything about who we are. So God sent his own son so that when we experience the hope of salvation, we know that Jesus died in our place, providing the pathway to God's presence for all eternity. And like this parable, his return is coming soon. And what we do with his most generous gift is the most important thing to consider today. Let's pray. God, we turn to you. We thank you for your word today. Your word was strong. Your response was strong. And you have expectations for us. And that's not to be harsh, but it's for life and for joy to be functioning in that. We just turn to you. We thank you for these things. God, we thank you for this word and help us to continue to apply these things. And as everybody's bowed their head, their eyes are closed, is there anybody that would say, you know what? I've maybe drifted from the Lord. I've never really pursued a relationship with him. Do you know that God can come in and bring hope and life to any situation? Do you know that wherever you find yourself, that you can respond to Jesus' offer for salvation, and he will forgive you, he will restore you? If that's anybody today, I just would like you to just slip up your hand. We're not going to make a big deal about it. Not a lot of people are looking. If that's something you're wanting to respond to, we just want to be sensitive to the Spirit here. There's also maybe some online that may be responding as well. So God is moving mightily here, and we just thank you for that. God, help us, Lord, as we respond to you, that you would help us to continue on in all that you have for us. Help us to make an impact, to be true disciples that mirror your generous heart. In your name we pray. Amen. We want to take a few prayer needs to the Lord this morning. I know the Angadi families